A later author, Immanuel Wallerstein, takes Lenin's core periphery worldview, coupled with this idea that bourgeois core countries are buying off their own workers, and expands on it. He gives us an extra category, the semi-periphery, and this forms part of his world systems theory. Wallerstein sees the world like this. You have the core countries. They are democratic governments with high wages, they import raw materials, they export manufactured goods, they have high levels of investment, and they have welfare services. Then you have the periphery countries. They are non-democratic governments with below subsistence wages. They import manufactured goods, they export raw materials, and they don't have welfare services. Then Wallerstein adds in the middle this semi-periphery category. They are the authoritarian governments with low wages. They import manufactured goods and raw materials. They export mature manufactured goods and raw materials. And they have a low level of welfare services. Now, the obvious question is, why do we need this middle category? Well, Wallerstein explains this. He says, one might make a good case that the world economy would function every bit as well without a semi-periphery. But it would be far less politically stable, for it would mean a polarized world system. The existence of the third category means precisely that the upper stratum is not faced with the unified opposition of all the others, because the middle stratum is both exploited and exploiter. So it's a systematic manifestation of that thing that Lenin was talking about, the break of the harmony of interests between all workers. That middle category means you can't have class solidarity on a global level. Okay, time to go back to the learning outcomes. To understand how Marxism can be applied to the international system. Well, by himself, Marx didn't have very much to say about the international system. But that doesn't mean that others couldn't take his work and do it for him, in much the same way as has been done by realists with Hobbes and liberals with Locke. To understand how Lenin was one of the first people to do that. Lenin took Marx's distinction between the bourgeoisie and the proletariat and applied it to states, again echoing the application by other theorists. But instead of calling them that, he called them the core and the periphery. To see how Lenin was inspired by an economist called John Hobson. Lenin took Hobson's idea that capitalist societies had three problems: overproduction, underconsumption and undersavings, and that therefore they needed to expand overseas, building empires in the process. For Lenin, capitalism was laying the seeds of its own destruction in doing so, as inevitably this would lead to war. Imperialism was the last stage of capitalism. To see how Lenin's work was expanded on by later authors. Authors such as Immanuel Wallerstein take Lenin's idea of the core and periphery and add a new category, the semi-periphery, which means that there will not be class solidarity around the world. I'd like to finish off with the words of Jonathan Wolff, who gives a tempered defence of Marx. He says, "Consider the great philosophers, Plato, Aristotle, Descartes, Locke, Hume and Kant, for example. If we were not to think these figures were worth reading, then who would be? But why do we read them? Is it because they've proved or established any firm results? Marx's grandest theories are not substantiated, but he's not to be abandoned. Marx remains the most profound and acute critic of capitalism. We may have no confidence in his solutions to the problems he identifies, but this does not make the problems go away." Marx didn't say very much about the international system. Others have taken his work and applied it globally. Clearly, when we look at levels of inequality around the world, we can see there are structural problems, meaning some parts of the world are massively disadvantaged with regard to others. Marxism is one lens through which we can try to understand why that's the case.